The small community hall was brighter than usual that evening. It's filled with soft lights, folding chairs, and the quiet buzz of people settling into their seats. It was the kind of event where no one came expecting anything extraordinary. Most people just wanted a peaceful night out, a little break from their daily routines. Some had come for the food stalls outside, others for the small performances lined up for the night. Everything about the atmosphere felt calm and almost predictable. As if nothing surprising could ever happen in such a familiar place. Inside, people were chatting in low voices. A group near the back joked loudly about something only they found funny. A few families sat together, adjusting their children's clothes or passing snacks around. The event organizers moved around briskly, reminding each performer of their time slot. The hall wasn't fancy, but it had an old charm wooden beams, slightly faded curtains, and a piano placed neatly in the center of the stage. The piano wasn't new, but it was polished well, its keys shining under the yellow lights. Most people barely noticed the piano at first. They were too busy talking about their day, about what they planned for the weekend, about small things that filled their lives. The performance schedule had a few singing acts, a short drama, and a local band that people seemed excited about. No one expected the piano to be a highlight. It was simply one of the instruments the organizers liked to keep on stage. Near the middle of the hall, a quiet figure sat alone, observing everything around. Not many people noticed them. They weren't talking, weren't waving at anyone, and weren't trying to be a part of any group. They sat with their hands on their lap, looking calm, but also a little nervous, as if something heavy rested on their mind. A few people glanced at them, wondering who they were, but no one approached. They blended into the background too naturally. It's like someone used to being unnoticed. As the event continued, small performances went by smoothly. A pair of students sang a duet. A young boy played a simple tune on the guitar. The audience clapped politely after each act, but no one was fully invested yet. It felt like everyone was just waiting for the main performances. Later in the night, that was when one of the organizers walked to the stage and adjusted the microphone. "We have a short performance coming up," the organizer said with a friendly smile. "Just a quick piece before the next act prepares." People nodded without much interest. They thought it would be another warm-up, something simple to fill time. Some continued talking quietly while others scrolled through their phones waiting for the next big act. No one stood or leaned forward with excitement. The hall remained busy with small noises, shuffling feet, whispered conversations, children asking for snacks. Then the quiet person from the middle row slowly stood up. They didn't look like someone preparing for a performance. Their clothes were simple, not the kind performers usually wore. They didn't carry anything with them, not even sheet music. They walked toward the stage with slow, steady steps, as if unsure whether they should really go through with it. The aisle felt longer than it usually did, and a few heads turned. Watching them walk, a group sitting near the front whispered, wondering if this was part of the schedule. Someone else shrugged, saying maybe they were testing the piano. That seemed more believable than an actual performance. No one had seen this person practice or talk to the organizers earlier. When they finally reached the stage, they didn't speak into the microphone or look at the audience. They didn't bow, smile, or make any announcement. Instead, they quietly pulled out the piano bench, sat down, and placed their hands gently above the keys. The audience barely shifted their attention. A few people continued chatting. A man in the corner joked softly, thinking this would be a simple warm-up. Someone else said they were probably checking if the piano was tuned. The idea that something meaningful was about to happen never crossed anyone's mind. The quiet figure took a slow breath. Their fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, almost trembling not with fear, but with a strange kind of emotion. It was as if they were carrying memories heavy enough to change the atmosphere around them. They didn't look up. They didn't scan the audience. They simply lowered their heads slightly, as if preparing themselves for something deeply personal. Then the first note rang out. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to stand out in the middle of the noise. People closest to the stage turned almost immediately. Something about the touch, the tone, the soft precision of the sound didn't feel like a warm-up. It felt intentional, like someone speaking through music. Those who were talking kept going at first, but the ones who heard the initial few notes began nudging others gently, telling them to listen. The quiet person continued playing, their fingers moving with surprising confidence, as if they had played this piece 1,000 times. The notes flowed smoothly, connecting one emotion to the next. Slowly, conversations faded. The man who had been joking stopped mid-sentence, his attention drawn by the melody. A mother holding her child looked toward the stage, surprised by the unexpected grace of the music. People who had been looking at their phones lifted their heads. Curious, no one expected this. The pianist's movements were gentle but steady, without hesitation or doubt. The music didn't feel like something rehearsed for an audience. It felt like something personal, like a memory being shared without words. Every note carried warmth, sadness, hope, emotions too pure to be ignored. A curious silence grew across the hall. It wasn't immediate, but it spread naturally like a wave. The ones who were closest to the stage turned first, then those behind them, and soon the entire room was shifting its attention toward the piano. The community hall, which had felt busy and noisy just moments before, now felt like a completely different place. Lights seemed softer, the air calmer, and the music filled every corner of the space. People exchanged surprised glances with each other, silently asking the same question: who was this person? And how were they playing like this? The pianist kept going, completely unaware of how much the room had changed. They weren't performing for applause or attention. Their body language made that clear. They were playing because the music meant something to them, something they had carried for a long time. Each movement of their fingers felt like a story quietly unfolding. Some in the crowd leaned forward, drawn by the depth in the sound. Others held their breath, not wanting to break the moment. Even the small children stopped moving, sensing something important was happening. The hall, once filled with low chatter and background noise, was now wrapped in a stillness that felt almost unreal. A person in the front row covered their mouth softly. Realizing that this wasn't an ordinary moment, the music had a quality that felt familiar, yet different, like a forgotten memory resurfacing through the melody. People didn't know what piece was being played, but it felt like it carried meaning. The organizers stood near the side of the stage, completely confused. They didn't remember scheduling this. They didn't know who the pianist was. But even they stayed quiet, unwilling to interrupt something that felt so genuine. As the performance continued, the hall seemed to shrink in size. The music made the room feel closer, warmer, as if everyone inside was experiencing the same emotion without speaking. Even those who usually didn't care much for music felt something stirring inside them. The pianist's posture stayed calm, but their hands spoke loudly through every note. The rise and fall of the melody felt like breathing. At times it was soft and delicate. At other moments it carried a quiet strength. People in the crowd felt their hearts pull in different directions, unsure how a simple performance could create such a strong reaction. What surprised everyone the most was how natural the pianist looked. No nervousness, no hesitation. They didn't look around the room, didn't check if people were watching, didn't adjust their hands self-consciously. They seemed lost in the music, as if the piano was a safe place where they could express everything they carried silently inside. The audience, which had started the night expecting a normal community event, now found themselves witnessing something meaningful, something intimate. They didn't know what made the pianist play like this, but the sincerity in the sound was impossible to ignore as the piece continued. A few people felt a strange feeling rising in their chest. A mother sitting with her daughter felt her eyes sting unexpectedly. A young man who had come only to see the band stopped thinking about the next act entirely. A quiet teenager in the back row, who rarely showed emotion, found themselves listening more closely than they had to anything in a long time. Something was happening. Something gentle. Something powerful. The performance wasn't flashy. There were no dramatic movements, no showing off, no loud or forceful notes. Everything was simple, calm, controlled. Yet it held more emotion than any loud performance could. It felt like the pianist was sharing a part of themselves with every note they played, a part they never shared with anyone before. Time seemed to move slower as the music continued. People didn't shift in their chairs, didn't check the clock, didn't whisper. They simply listened, allowing the music to wash over them. For the first time that evening, the hall wasn't just a place for community gathering, it was a place where something meaningful was happening. Even the lights above the stage felt different, glowing softly as if respecting the moment. The piano, which had been ignored at the start of the event, now became the center of everything. Every eye focused on the pianist, every ear tuned to the melody. No one knew the quiet person's story yet. No one knew why they sat alone, or why they decided to play so suddenly. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the feeling the music created, an unexpected calm that touched everyone in the hall. The pianist continued playing, unaware of the emotional shift happening around them. Their fingers glided gently along the keys. Creatine. The moment the first part of the melody settled into the room, the hall felt different, almost as if something invisible had shifted in the air. People who had been distracted earlier now sat quietly, their eyes following the movements of the pianist's hands. The music had a strange pull to it, something soft yet strong, like a voice that asked you to listen, even if you didn't understand why. The quiet figure at the piano seemed unaware of how many people were staring now. Their focus stayed on the keys, each note blending smoothly into the next. The gentle rise and fall of the melody created a calmness that reached every corner of the hall. Even the ones who normally didn't care about music found themselves leaning in, drawn in by something they couldn't name. A young boy sitting in the second row, who had been restless the entire evening, suddenly stopped fidgeting. His mother noticed and looked at the stage with surprise. A couple sitting near the back, who had been whispering earlier, now listened without saying a word. An elderly man adjusted his glasses to get a better look. Feeling a strange sense of recognition in the way the melody moved, the performance didn't feel like entertainment. It felt like emotion. Real, raw emotion. The pianist's hands glided across the keys with a steady rhythm. But there was more behind it than simple skill. Each note carried weight, as if it was connected to a memory, a story, or a feeling that couldn't be put into words. People could sense it. Something about the quiet person's playing made them feel like they were listening to a piece of someone's life. The melody slowly shifted. It started soft and warm, then moved into something deeper, something that made people feel their chests tighten just a little. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was more complex than that. It felt like remembering something important, something once lost, but still alive somewhere inside. A woman sitting near the aisle felt her eyes sting unexpectedly. She brushed a tear away before anyone noticed. She didn't know why the music affected her like that, but something about it touched a part of her she didn't visit often. An older man sitting beside her felt a similar pull. He didn't cry, but he felt something heavy inside him loosen. He had no idea who the pianist was, but he knew that whoever they were playing from a place that wasn't ordinary. The notes became more confident, flowing like a gentle stream that had found its path. A small smile formed on the pianist's lips, not visible to everyone, but real enough for those near the front row to notice. It wasn't a proud smile or a showy one. It was small, almost shy, like someone feeling the comfort of something familiar. Someone near the back whispered, "Who is this?" The question didn't carry annoyance or confusion, just surprise. No one answered because no one knew. A few people looked toward the organizers, hoping to understand, but the organizers looked just as confused. One of them shrugged with a quiet laugh. He's feeling just as lost as the rest of the audience. The melody shifted again, becoming a little brighter. It lifted gently, as if carrying a story upward, giving it light and hope. People who had felt heavy moments ago now felt lighter, their hearts rising with the music. There was no talking in the hall now, no shuffling, no whispering, just the sound of the piano and the quiet breathing of the people who were listening. The pianist's movements were calm, steady, and full of feeling. They didn't rush through the notes. They didn't play forcefully. Everything was controlled but natural, like someone pouring their heart out without even realizing how deeply it was affecting others. The quiet person's eyes closed slowly as they continued to play. Their fingers danced across the keys with a grace that didn't come from training alone. It came from experience, from something lived. somewhere. A child shifted softly in their seat, but even that small sound didn't break the moment. The music was strong enough to hold the room together. The hall lights created a warm glow around the pianist, outlining their figure like a silhouette that belonged on that stage. People felt a strange sense of connection, even though they didn't know the performer's name, age, or story. The music alone was enough to create that bond. A man standing near the back, who had come late and missed the beginning, entered quietly and froze at the doorway. He didn't move forward. He didn't look for a seat, simply stood still, listening. He had never seen the hall so silent before. He had expected noise and laughter, maybe even a bit of chaos. Instead, he walked into a room held together by one quiet person and a piano. As the music continued to grow, the pianist's hands moved. Faster for a moment, then slowed again, creating a rhythm that felt like breathing deep, emotional breathing. It was the kind of music that made people think of their own stories, their own memories. A young girl sitting with her grandmother squeezed her grandmother's hand without knowing why. The grandmother squeezed back gently. They didn't speak, but the connection was enough. The performance wasn't about impressing anyone, wasn't about showing off talent, it was about feeling, deep, honest feeling. The pianist opened their eyes for a moment, glancing at the keys as if checking their flow. But then something happened, something small but important. They looked up, not long, not dramatically, but just enough to see the audience, and for a second they froze. The hall was silent. Every single eye was on them. Every person, every child, every older adult, everyone was watching, listening, waiting. The pianist's breath caught for a moment. Their fingers slowed, but not enough to break the flow of the music. They weren't expecting to be seen. They weren't expecting attention. It almost felt overwhelming. But then something softened in their expression, something fragile but brave. They took a slow breath, lowered their head again, let their hands guide them back into the heart of the melody. It was clear now that this wasn't just a performance. This was a moment the pianist had tried to avoid for a long time, being watched, being heard, being understood. And now they had no choice but to face it. The music grew heavier for a moment, deeper, as if the pianist was letting a part of their soul slip into the room. People felt it instantly. A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the middle rows. Others shifted, but not in discomfort. The pianist's shoulders relaxed slightly as they continued, and their bodies seemed to follow the rhythm, swaying gently with the melody. The softness in their movements told the audience something without words. This wasn't just skill. This was connection. This was truth. The melody brightened again, almost like sunlight appearing after clouds. It washed over the hall with warmth that people felt in their chest. A woman sitting alone whispered to herself, "This is beautiful." She didn't mean for anyone to hear, but someone next to her nodded, subtly agreeing. The performance moved into a section that felt familiar to some people, though they couldn't explain why. There was something about the pattern of the notes, timing, the emotion, that made it feel connected to something from the past. But no one could place it yet. Someone tried recording part of the performance on their phone, not wanting to forget it later. But even the small sound of the phone being lifted felt too loud. So they moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid of disturbing the moment. The pianist stayed calm, their fingers moving with a confidence that didn't match their quiet personality. They didn't look up again for a long time. They stayed lost in the music, trusting it to speak for them. As the melody continued to shift between soft and strong, people felt emotions rise and fall inside them. Some felt memories coming back, moments they didn't think about often. Others felt hope or comfort or sadness they couldn't explain. No one knew what the quiet person was trying to say through the music, but they all felt there was something important hidden in it. A man sitting in the front row leaned back in his chair, his eyes slightly watery. He hadn't expected to be moved tonight. He'd come only because his friend invited him. Now he felt grateful he didn't stay home. Near the back, a teenage girl who rarely showed interest in community events wiped a tear away quickly, hoping no one saw. She didn't know what part of the music touched her, but she felt lighter afterward. Even the organizers, who were usually busy and distracted, now stood still on the side, completely absorbed. The pianist shifted into a softer part of the melody, letting the notes fall gently like raindrops. People inhaled slowly, as if afraid breathing too loudly would break the moment. As the music moved toward its next emotional peak, the pianist's hands trembled, just slightly, not from fear, but from intensity. They were giving everything they had to the music, everything they had held back for years. The audience could sense it. The melody grew again, fuller, deeper, as the pianist's expression changed, showing something fragile, something real. It was clear that this wasn't just a performance, it was a confession without words. People leaned in, waiting, listening, feeling. The piano keys glowed gently under the stage lights as the quiet person played a series of notes. That felt like a message. It wasn't obvious yet, but there was something familiar about the pattern. Something that some people felt tug at their memory. The pianist lifted their hands for a moment, letting a brief silence settle into the room. A silence so fragile that even the sound of someone swallowing felt loud. Then they pressed the keys again, soft at first. Then clearer, stronger, a ripple of recognition went through a few people in the audience. They didn't understand it fully, but they felt it. The melody had meaning. Real meaning. The pianist kept going. Unaware of how close the audience was to understanding a truth hidden inside the music, the room stayed silent, breathless, waiting, and the melody kept weaving a story when the audience didn't know yet. But one they were slowly beginning to feel. The moment the melody shifted into a deeper tone, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. The music no longer felt like something simple or light. It carried weight now, a kind of quiet strength that made people sit up straighter without even realizing they were doing it. The pianist's fingers moved with a new intensity, not fast or dramatic, but certain, as if they were guiding the story toward a place they had avoided for a long time. The room, once filled with quiet amazement, now felt layered with emotion. People didn't know exactly what they were feeling, but they knew it was something important. It wasn't just music anymore. It was something personal slipping through the notes, Young man sitting near the front leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, trying to understand the pattern in the melody. He wasn't a musician, but he felt something familiar in the way the notes rose and fell. It was as if he had heard this feeling somewhere before, even if not the actual tune. He squinted toward the stage, watching the pianist's hands, wondering what story they were trying to tell. A woman holding her small bag tightly against her chest felt her heartbeat sinking strangely with the rhythm. She didn't know the pianist, but she felt as if she was hearing someone's heart open right in front of her. She took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. The pianist, still quiet and focused, seemed unaware of how deeply their playing was affecting the others. Their expression had changed since the beginning. Their eyes were softer, their shoulders slightly drawn in, their entire posture looking like someone remembering something painful and beautiful at the same time. The melody softened again. It turned delicate, almost like a whisper one, so gentle that everyone in the room leaned in instinctively. Even people sitting in the last row felt the pull of that softness. A child sitting near the aisle rested his head on his mother's arm, drawn into the calmness of the sound. His mother stroked his hair absent-mindedly, not taking her eyes away from the stage. The pianist slowed down, playing each note as if it held a memory. The pauses between the notes grew slightly longer, giving people time to feel the weight of each moment. It was a quiet kind of yearning that made some people feel an ache deep inside their chest. In the second row, an older woman covered her mouth with both hands. She didn't understand the music technically, but she felt something hidden inside the melody, something she hadn't felt in years. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her like warmth she didn't know she needed. A teenager, near the back, who usually listened to loud music on headphones and ignored most of these events, found himself frozen. He didn't know why he cared, but for some reason his heart felt heavy in a way that was strangely comforting. The pianist's hands trembled slightly, but they pushed through it. The melody changed once again, turning richer and more emotional. People could feel the tension growing, even if they didn't understand what was causing it. Someone whispered to a friend, "This doesn't feel like just a performance." The friend nodded quietly, unable to look away. Even the small hum of the lights above seemed quieter now, as if the room itself was listening. The music began to climb, slowly at first, then with more certainty. The notes blended into one another with a smoothness that felt intentional, like a message being formed piece by piece. The pianist's body moved with the music, now slight tilts of the head. Gentle sways of the shoulders. They weren't showing off. They weren't trying to impress. They were simply letting the music lead them, as if following a path they had been afraid to walk for a long time. As the melody grew stronger, a strange feeling settled into the audience. It felt like the music was trying to say something. Not with words, not with obvious signs, but with the way it shifted between softness and strength. A man near the middle row frowned slightly, trying to place the feeling the melody gave him. It wasn't something he could name, but it made him think of old stories passed around the community, stories he hadn't thought about in years. Several others felt the same without realizing it. A subtle spark of familiarity hovered around the melody, but not enough for anyone to identify clearly. The pianist took a deeper breath, their chest rising more noticeably. Their fingers pressed the keys with a mixture of caution and courage. The notes that came out next carried a tone that felt like confession, gentle but honest. The hall's silence deepened. The music lowered again, almost fragile. If someone had dropped something, it would have sounded thunderous in comparison. The pianist's fingers moved slower, but with purpose, each note feeling like a door opening to something hidden. A woman in the front row leaned back slightly, her heart beating faster. She didn't understand why, but the melody was pulling a memory from far inside her. Her eyes widened as she sensed the beginning of something she couldn't yet explain. The pianist shifted in too. Another sequence of notes, a softer pattern that floated through the air like a memory. Trying to take form, a subtle murmur rose from a small group sitting near the aisle. One of them placed a hand over their chest, feeling something stir. Another squinted and whispered, "Wait, doesn't this sound like?" But didn't finish the sentence. No one said anything loud enough to break the moment, but the energy in the room shifted again. People weren't just listening anymore, they were trying to understand. The music picked up slightly, the rhythm becoming more fluid. The pianist's movements grew more expressive, though still controlled. They played with their whole body now, not just their hands. They leaned into the music, their expression tightening as if they were reliving something. A young girl sitting with her grandmother whispered, "It sounds like a story." Her grandmother nodded softly. Not taking her eyes off the stage, the melody deepened, taking on a tone that made people feel like they were standing at the edge of something important. They didn't know what it was, but they felt it coming. It was like watching a sunrise and knowing the light was about to break over the horizon. The pianist struck a series of notes that hung in the air with a strange kind of power. People felt the shift immediately. It was subtle, but meaningful. Someone near the back whispered, "This tune. I've heard something like this before." But when asked where, they shook their head, unable to place it. The pianist didn't look up, but their breathing grew heavier, their movements more emotional. They were no longer playing just a melody. They were telling something they had kept quiet for a long time. A man sitting at the end of a row suddenly sat forward, his eyes narrowing as if trying to read between the notes. He wasn't sure why, but something in the melody tugged at a memory or rumor. A story he once heard about a musician in the community, a musician who had disappeared. But he pushed the thought away. It felt too far-fetched. The music softened again, dipping into gentle tones that made people feel both calm and uneasy at the same time. The pianist's hands slowed down, their fingers pressing the keys as if choosing each note carefully. The melody was delicate, almost like someone speaking quietly, trying not to let their voice shake. The hall felt suspended in that moment. People looked at the pianist's face, noticing the emotions flickering through the tightness around the eyes, the tension in the jaw, the softness in the mouth. They looked like someone carrying a story too heavy to say aloud. The music dipped again, then rose gently. The pianist's eyes closed tightly for a moment, and their hands trembled again. But they kept going. A man in the front row whispered to himself, "This means something to them." He didn't need to know the details. He could feel it. The pianist transitioned into a part of the melody that felt unmistakably emotional. It carried sorrow and longing, but also strength. The notes pulled people deeper, making them feel emotions they didn't expect. A woman near the back wiped her cheeks, surprised to find tears there. She wasn't sad, not really. It was just something inside her felt full. The pianist's movements grew more intense, though not louder. Their fingers pressed deeper into the keys, their shoulders rising and falling with each breath. The hall felt like it was holding on to something, waiting. The melody rose once more, gentler this time, like a question waiting for an answer. The pianist paused for a brief second, their hands hovering just above the keys. People leaned in. Then, the pianist pressed the next note, and a ripple went through the room. It was a simple note, but it connected to the next and the next, forming a pattern that a few people recognized immediately. Even if they couldn't believe it, a soft gasp came from somewhere in the middle rows. Someone whispered, "That can't be." Another person placed a hand over their heart. The melody wasn't just beautiful anymore. It was familiar, too familiar. People exchanged glances, confused and amazed, trying to understand what they were hearing. The pianist continued. Unaware of the realization spreading through the hall, they played the notes with a kind of emotional truth that made it clear they weren't copying a piece, they were connected to it, and the audience could feel it. The room grew still again. But this time the silence wasn't just about listening. It was about understanding something that was beginning to surface. Something people had forgotten or chosen not to think about. The melody continued, inching the crowd closer to a truth they hadn't expected, and the pianist, lost in the music, had no idea that their quiet performance was turning into a moment that would change everything. The hall had already changed in the last few minutes. Everyone could feel it. What started as a simple moment was slowly turning into something people would talk about for a long time. The person on the stage still sat quietly at the piano, but now there was a different energy in the room. People had stopped whispering, stopped shifting in their seats, and stopped looking around. Every eye was focused on the performer. Every breath seemed to fall in the same rhythm as the music. The performer kept their heads slightly lowered, almost as if they were thinking through each note before playing it. It didn't look rehearsed. It didn't look like something practiced for months. It looked like a confession, a real one. Like the person was speaking through the piano in a language only the heart could understand. The music moved from soft to sharp in a way. It felt like a story twisting through hidden paths. It made some people lean forward, trying to follow where it was going. Some even held their hands near their mouths, as if the sound might break if they moved. There was a strange tension floating in the room, one that no one could explain, but everyone could feel. A man in the front row narrowed his eyes as the melody shifted again. The tune was familiar, too familiar, like something he had heard years ago. He tilted his head, trying to remember where it came from. Behind him, an older woman frowned with the same confused expression, as though a part of her memory was waking up. The performer didn't look at anyone, but they seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Their hands moved faster, sliding from one end of the piano to the other with more confidence than before. The quiet person who had walked up to the stage earlier seemed completely transformed now. It was as if the piano had opened a door inside them, and everything they had kept hidden was coming out through the keys. The melody grew stronger, fuller, like it was filling up the entire hall. People could feel the vibrations in their chest. A few even closed their eyes to let the sound take them deeper. It wasn't just music anymore. It was something personal, something with weight, something that carried a secret. Then, slowly, the piece drifted into a new theme. And this time, the reaction was immediate. A man near the back stood up without realizing it. "Wait," he whispered. But the room was too quiet for anyone not near him to hear the words. He put a hand on the shoulder of the person beside him, breathing a little faster. "This tune? I know this tune." The person sitting next to him looked confused at first, but then their expression changed to recognition, deep, sudden recognition. A soft gasp rose from the left side of the hall as someone else realized it as well. One by one, more faces shifted, eyes widening, lips parting slightly. People started whispering to themselves, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. It wasn't just a melody. It wasn't just music. It was a piece connected to a musician the community had once known, someone whose name was spoken with a mixture of respect and sorrow. Someone who had disappeared years ago without explanation. The older woman in the second row covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. She had heard this melody before. She had heard it in a small music shop late in the evening many years ago, played by someone who poured their whole soul into the piano. It's like the person on stage was doing now. As the music continued, people began to realize the truth. Some whispered the musician's name under their breath. Others looked at one another in shock. But everyone knew the same thing. This was not a coincidence. This piece wasn't random. It wasn't even common. Only one person had ever played it with this kind of emotion. All the memories started coming back, stories told around dinner tables, videos that had once spread in the community, tears shed when that musician vanished without a trace. People had wondered where they went, what happened, if they would ever return, and now someone was sitting at the piano playing their signature melody. The performer finally lifted their head, not fully, just enough to let the audience see their eyes. And that was enough. That was more than enough. A wave of shock rippled through the hall. People gasped. Some stood. Some covered their mouths. Some stepped back as if the truth had hit them physically. The performer didn't stop playing. Their hands kept moving, but their eyes told the story the music didn't. Eyes that looked tired. Eyes that carried years of silence. Eyes that held the weight of everything they had kept hidden. A man in the crowd whispered, "It can't be." Another whispered, "Is it really them?" The older woman began to cry softly, shaking her head in disbelief. She had always hoped the musician would return, but she never thought they would come back like this, quietly, without announcement. Without warning, the performer took a deep breath and let their eyes sweep across the room for just a moment. It was enough to show that they understood the shock. It was enough to show they knew this moment would change everything. The music grew more emotional. Each note sounded heavier now, as if it carried all the missing years on its back. People felt the pain, the struggle, the journey inside the melody. It was as if the performer had lived through storms that no one else knew about. And now they were letting it all out for the first time. A young person in the front row wiped their eyes, unable to stop the tears. They didn't know the old stories personally, but they could feel how deep the music went. They could see the truth in the performer's hands and expression. The hall remained silent, except for the piano. No one moved. No one even breathed loudly. Everyone was too shocked, too emotional, too caught in the moment to look away. As the melody reached a high point, the performer slowed down, letting the notes linger in the air. The sound spread like ripples across a still lake. It felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Then came the final shift, a gentle, soft variation of the old melody. Something the lost musician had never played in public. Something only someone very close to them could know. Something that revealed more than words ever could. People understood instantly. This wasn't just a tribute. This wasn't just a performance. This was the truth. The performer was connected to the lost musician in a way deeper than anyone had imagined. Whether they were a sibling, a child, or the musician themselves, returning after years in silence, no one knew for certain yet. But they knew one thing. This quiet performance was not ordinary. It was a reveal, a shocking, emotional, unforgettable reveal. The performer's hands trembled slightly on the last few notes, but they played them with complete honesty. It felt as if they were finally letting go of something heavy they had carried for years. When the final note floated into the air, it didn't fade quickly. It seemed to stay for a moment, touching every person in the room like a soft whisper. The performer lifted their hands from the keys and placed them gently on their lap. Their shoulders rose and fell slowly as they took a deep breath. No one clapped. No one cheered. Not yet. The room was too stunned. People were still trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, quietly, the performer looked up. Their eyes were calm now, no longer hiding anything. They glanced at the audience not with pride, not with fear, but with the quiet strength of someone who has finally told their truth. The hall was frozen in silence, waiting for whatever would happen next. The performer stood up from the piano bench, and with that simple movement, the entire room felt the weight of the reveal. No words were needed. The truth was already out. The moment the performer stood up from the piano bench, the hall felt different. It was as if time had slowed down, and everyone was trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Some people were still standing with their mouths slightly open, while others sat frozen in their seats, unable to move or even blink. The silence in the room was so deep that the faint echo of the final note still felt alive. The performer kept their hands loosely at their sides, breathing slowly as if they had just finished a long and difficult journey. Their expression was calm, but there was something fragile behind it, like someone who had finally let go of a secret they had carried for too long. They didn't rush to leave the stage. They didn't try to speak. They just stood there, quietly, allowing everyone to absorb the moment. The first sound that broke the silence was a soft sob from the second row. The older woman, who had recognized the melody earlier, wiped her eyes, unable to hide how touched she was. Her shoulders shook as she cried, but there was relief mixed with her tears. It was the kind of emotion that came from years of waiting and finally seeing something she had lost hope for. A person in the front row placed a hand on their chest, struggling to steady their breathing. Another whispered something to the person beside them, but their voice trembled so much the words didn't come out clearly. The entire hall was full of people who didn't know whether to applaud or simply stand there quietly. Finally, one person in the back took a deep breath and slowly began clapping. The sound was hesitant at first, like they weren't sure if it was the right thing to do. But then another person joined, and another. Soon, the clapping grew stronger. It spread from the back of the room to the front, rising like a wave that carried the weight of all the emotions the audience had been holding in. It wasn't loud or wild applause. It was gentle, respectful, full of shock, gratitude, and admiration. It felt like a thank you, not just for the music, but for the truth that had been revealed. The performer lowered their head slightly in response, acknowledging the crowd with a soft, almost shy expression. They didn't smile widely or raise their hands. They didn't act like a star or a person seeking attention. They simply stood there, showing a quiet strength that made the moment even more meaningful. Some people walked closer to the stage, drawn forward without even realizing it. A few tried to say something, but the words didn't come easily. It was hard to speak after a moment like this. A man who had been standing earlier stepped forward slowly. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at the performer as if he were looking at a ghost, someone he thought he would never see again, or someone who reminded him too much of the person he had lost years ago. The performer looked back at him with a gentle expression, acknowledging the connection without needing any explanation. Their eyes said enough. They spoke a truth that words could only complicate. More people gathered near the front, forming a small crowd around the stage. But everyone kept a respectful distance, giving the performer space. No one pushed forward. No one shouted questions. They all seemed to understand that this was not the time for excitement. This was a moment to listen, to breathe, to appreciate. Eventually, someone asked softly, "Where have you been all these years?" The question wasn't sharp or demanding. It was full of curiosity, concern, and compassion. The performer took a few seconds before answering. Their voice was quiet, almost fragile, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. "I needed time," they said simply. That was all. And somehow it was enough. The crowd nodded. They understood. Even without hearing the full story, they felt the weight behind those words. Time for healing. Time for silence. Time to face things that couldn't be shared with others. Time to find the courage to play again. Another person stepped forward, their voice shaking as they said, "We thought you were gone forever. We thought you wouldn't come back." The performer looked down for a moment, their shoulders lowering slightly. Then they lifted their gaze and said, "I didn't know if I would either, but today felt right." Those simple words carried so much emotion that several people started crying. It was a rare kind of honest to quiet, real, and deeply human. Someone from the organizing team walked up slowly. Their hands were trembling as they held a microphone. But before offering it, They paused, unsure if the performer even wanted to speak. The performer shook their head gently, signaling that no microphone was needed. They didn't want a speech. They didn't want attention. All they wanted was to share the music. The organizer respected that and stepped back. The performer took a small breath and looked at the piano again. Their eyes softened, like someone looking at an old friend. They reached out and ran their fingers lightly across the top of the instrument, as if thanking it for carrying their truth. A young person from the audience finally gathered the courage to speak. "You played like the music was alive," they said. "Like every note had something to say. I've never seen anything like that." The performer's eyes warmed, touched by the comment. "The music helped me say what I couldn't," they replied. That simple sentence felt like a lesson for everyone in the room. It reminded them how powerful music could be, how it could carry stories, pain, love, memories, things that people often struggled to put into words. More people approached, not to overwhelm the performer, but to express their support. Some said thank you. Some said they had missed hearing music played with such emotion. Others simply nodded, unable to speak. The performer listened quietly to all of them. They didn't interrupt. They didn't rush. They responded with soft smiles and short, sincere answers. The room felt peaceful, almost sacred, as if the hall itself understood the importance of the moment. Eventually, the performer stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted respectfully, making space for them to walk. A few people reached out gently, offering small gestures of support, light touches on the arm. Soft words of encouragement, a warm smile from across the room. Outside the hall, the air felt cool. The performer paused for a moment, taking in the quiet night. The sky was calm, with a few stars peeking through the darkness. They closed their eyes briefly, letting the fresh air fill their lungs. It felt different now, lighter, freer. Inside the hall, people were still buzzing with whispers and emotions. Some couldn't stop talking about the reveal. Some were trying to make sense of the connection between the performer and the missing musician. Others simply stood there, wiping their eyes and holding their breath. As they replayed the performance in their minds, no one felt the urge to leave quickly. They felt as if they had witnessed something rare, something that didn't happen every day, something that touched the deepest parts of the human heart. The performer stepped away from the door, taking slow, steady steps into the open night. They didn't look back, not because they wanted to forget anything, but because the chapter they had been stuck in for so long had finally closed. A new one was waiting now, one filled with acceptance, truth, and the quiet warmth of people who finally understood them. As they walked down the quiet street, a small smile appeared on their face. It wasn't a bright or dramatic smile. It was soft, peaceful, and full of relief. The kind of smile that came only after years of carrying a heavy weight, for the first time in a long time. They felt ready to return not to fame or attention, but to themselves, to the music they loved, to the world they once left behind, and inside the hall. People continued to talk about the performance that had started so quietly and ended with a truth no one saw coming. They knew this moment would stay with them. They knew they would tell this story for years to come. A quiet piano performance had turned into something else, something powerful, healing and unforgettable. A reveal that would live in their hearts long after the final note had faded.